What was the mark of Cain, really? For centuries, people have argued, imagined, even sensationalized this mystery. But the clearest answers hide in one small Hebrew word that most readers never notice. When you put biblical Hebrew beside the ancient oral tradition, the story of Cain's sign stops being a riddle and becomes a window into justice, mercy, and what it means to live under the weight of a mistake. You already know the story's outline. Cain and Abel, the first brothers. Each brings an offering. Abel brings the best of his flock, the first and the finest. Cain offers produce of the ground. What the text implies was ordinary, perhaps careless. In a way, the Bible is blunt. God turns toward Abel's gift and not toward Cain's. And in that moment, Cain's face falls. You can almost see it. Shoulders drop, the jaw tightens, the heat of resentment rises. Instead of taking responsibility, Cain turns his frustration into jealousy. If Abel weren't here, he thinks, there'd be no comparison, no spotlight on my failure. God addresses Cain like a mentor. Why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be lifted? Sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you can master it. It's an invitation. Take control of your inner world. Steer your impulses. Choose differently next time. Then comes a curious line. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against Abel and killed him. Did you notice what's missing? It says Cain spoke, but what did he say? The verse withholds the content and jumps straight to the act. That gap matters. The Bible has a written text, but the people who preserved it also passed down an oral tradition. Conversations, explanations, details that clarify what's implied but not spelled out. There are countless places where, without that tradition, we'd be lost. The covenant of Brit Milah, literally covenant of the word. How do we know it means circumcision and where it's performed? The written word alone is cryptic. The command of fringes and frontlets, tzitzit and tefillin, what are they? How are they made? Where do they go? The practice was known because it was lived and taught, not just inked on a page. That same lens helps with Cain's sign. After the killing, God confronts Cain. Your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. The earth has opened its mouth to receive it. You will be cursed from the ground, a wanderer, a restless drifter upon the land. Cain panics. My guilt is too great to bear, he says. If I'm driven from your presence and left exposed, anyone who finds me will kill me. He is consumed by consequences, by fear, by the fragile future of a marked life. And then comes the verse that launched centuries of speculation. And the Lord set a sign upon Cain, so that any who found him would not strike him. And that sign is where Hebrew unlocks the door. The word is ot. Yes, it means a sign, but in biblical Hebrew it can also mean a letter. One word, two pathways, and a flood of understanding. With that nuance and the oral tradition together, you don't get wild guesses. You get well-rooted explanations of what that sign could have been and why. One ancient explanation says God placed a letter from the divine name upon Cain's forehead, a literal letter as a living seal. Why would that matter? Look at Cain's world. Humanity is a tiny family. If he fears being killed, it's not just about other people. It's also about a raw, pre-civilized earth. Early tradition imagines the animals as spiritually and behaviorally different than later generations, more dangerous, more predatory, and Cain knows he's spiritually vulnerable. The letter marks him with presence and protection. It announces to creation itself, don't touch. In this reading, the sign is both letter and sign. OT in both senses at once, perfectly echoing the Hebrew. A second line in the tradition leans on another biblical pattern. God often calls wonders signs, otot. Recall Exodus when Moses doubts his mission. God grants him signs, a staff that becomes a serpent, a hand that becomes white with Tzaraat and then heals. Many translations flattened Tzaraat into leprosy, but that's a poor substitute. In the Bible, Tzaraat is a spiritual skin affliction with a ritual dimension, not our modern disease. The point is the word. Those wonders are called signs, otot. That's why some sources say Cain's oti was Tzaraat spread upon his skin, an unmistakable visible mark tied directly to a biblical category of sign. It's not arbitrary, it's anchored in Scripture's own language. A third view describes something horn-like, a protrusion. To modern ears that sounds strange, but the Bible often uses horns, karnayim, as symbols of strength or signals of divine intervention. The shofar, a ram's horn, is blown as a sign to gather, to warn, to announce the presence of God in Israel's story and in prophetic visions. The tradition imagines a small horn-like growth, a visible signal on Cain's body. Not a cartoonish pair of horns, but a singular startling emblem, a living shofar of sorts, a standing ot. A fourth interpretation says, God appointed a dog to accompany Cain, guardian and warning in one. That too has echoes in Scripture. When the prophet condemns King Ahab, the disgrace is punctuated by a chilling sign. Dogs will lick his blood. Dogs in the Bible sometimes function as stark markers of judgment, a sign to all who see. For Cain, a dog's constant presence would make him conspicuous and at the same time safe. Predators would keep their distance. People would think twice. The companion itself becomes the sign. Notice how these options split between light and shadow. A letter from the name feels merciful, intimate. Tzaraat feels heavy, consequence on the skin. A horn advertises a public warning. A dog escorts him through a dangerous world. Together they mirror the ambivalence of the moment, justice and mercy, judgment and protection. Cain is not exonerated, but he isn't discarded. The sign is God's way of saying, your act has reshaped your life, and I will still keep it from being cut short by vengeance. Now pause and ask yourself, which interpretation fits the text and the character best? A letter? A skin sign? A horn-like mark? A dog at his heel? Drop your take in the comments and tell me why. And if you're finding this deep dive clarifying, tap like to help it reach others. And subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration into the Hebrew of the text. But there's another question that nags. If God marked Cain so no one would kill him, then how did Cain die? The Bible is quiet, but the oral tradition preserves a dramatic, tragic scene 7 generations later. The line of Cain grows down to a man named Lamech, older now with failing sight. He goes into the field with his son, Tubal-Cain, a gifted worker in bronze and iron, the ancestor of early technology. They're hunting. Tubal-Cain, acting as his father's eyes, thinks he spots an animal and guides Lamech to draw the bow. The arrow flies, a cry. They approach and realize with horror who lies there, Cain. In that instant, legend says, Lamech claps his hands together in grief, only to strike and kill the son standing between them. The Midrash ties this back to a cryptic declaration in Genesis 4, when Lamech turns to his wives, Ada and Zillah. Hear my voice, wives of Lamech, give ear to my speech, for I have slain a man for wounding me, and a young man for bruising me. Without tradition, that verse is a puzzle. With it, the words become a confession. An older man slain, Cain, and a younger one, his own son, lost by his own anguished blow. It is a double tragedy. The first murderer dies by accident, and the father who killed without intending to loses his child the same day. Why include such a story? Because it threads back to God's promise over Cain. Whoever kills Cain will suffer 7-fold vengeance. The tradition counts generations and sees a pattern fulfilled, not as divine permission for violence, but as a marker that Cain's story, like his sign, moved under God's sovereignty. Protection was granted, ultimate control remained in God's hands. And when Lamech later says, if Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 70 and 7, it's not a boast, It's a desperate attempt to argue that his deed was unintentional, that if Cain, who acted with intent, was shielded, then surely one who killed without malice should not be cast off by his family. In the Midrash, he pleads with his wives not to abandon him. It was a terrible mistake. Hear me. Stay. What began as a question about a mark becomes a meditation on how the Bible communicates. The written words are spare and potent. The Hebrew is compact, layered, and alive with nuances. Oti is a sign and a letter. Tzaraat is not just disease language, but ritual language, a category of sign. Horns are not mere anatomy, but symbols of power and proclamation. Dogs, in certain prophecies, are not pets, but living portents. Layer on the oral tradition and the missing conversations, mysterious objects and unresolved tensions light up with texture. It also becomes a reflection on moral psychology. Cain fails in worship, not because the gift is produce and not animals, but because the heart and the offering don't match excellence. He fails again by not internalizing God's counsel. And yet even then, the story bends toward preservation. God marks him. God keeps the cycle of vengeance from swallowing the earliest family whole. Justice is pronounced, mercy is enacted. For readers today, that matters. We don't just learn what the mark was, we learn what marks us. Our choices, our capacity to master what crouches at the door, and the God who still chooses to restrain chaos on our behalf. So, what was the mark of Cain? Maybe a letter blazing with meaning, maybe a skin sign that shouted consequence, maybe a horn-like protrusion that made him unforgettable, maybe the steady padding of a dog at dusk. Each possibility is anchored in Scripture's language and ancient memory. Each tells the same bigger truth. Cain walked the earth under a sign that was both warning and shelter, and his story, like ours, was not beyond the reach of instruction, restraint, and complicated grace. If this helped you see the passage with fresh eyes, share it with someone who still thinks the mark was a sensational rumor. And remember to subscribe for more explorations where a single Hebrew word turns a familiar verse into a living, breathing story.